Good evening, everyone. My name is Nishil Mehta, and I'm a final year PhD student working with Vivian Parmentier from Observatoire de la Côte d'Azur. And today I'll be presenting my work on combining JWST data and GCMs to study the warm Jupiter. Now, I would like to start with this exoplanet plot for equilibrium temperature versus the radius, where I've highlighted all the HST planets. Now, during the HST era, we mainly focused on hot Jupiters. But with JWST, we now have the opportunity to study the warm Jupiters. Now, warm Jupiters are Jupiter-sized planets with an equilibrium temperature of less than 1000 Kelvin. And in this talk, I'll be mainly focusing on these three planets, which are WASP 107b, WASP 80b, and WASP 69. Now, when we look at these planets, uh, we see that these yeah. So we see that these planets have similar are in the same temperature regime. They have similar radius of around one Jupiter radius. They have similar host stars, which is like they orbit around M dwarf star, but they have different masses and hence different gravity. Now, thanks to the MANATEE GTO program, we have the JWST data for all the three planets. In particular, for WASP-80, we have the panchromatic transmission and emission data, making it a great target for a GCM study. Now, when we compare the observations of these planets, we start noticing the differences in their atmospheres. Now, let's start with comparing the transmission spectrum of WASP 107 and WASP 80b. So here we can see that methane is depleted on WASP 107b, whereas it is present throughout the atmosphere of WASP 80b. On the other hand, if we compare the emission spectrum of WASP 69b and WASP 80b, we start noticing the differences in the brightness temperatures throughout the spectral range. Now, even though these planets have similar temperature or similar host stars, their atmospheres are showing different observations. So with these differences in the transmission and emission data, we need 3D models to study the 3D data. And for this, we use a GCM called ADAM, which was formerly known as SPARC MIT GCM. And previously, we used to focus on equilibrium chemistry for hotter planets, where we assume some metallicity and C-bio ratio. But with these cooler planets, the atmosphere has started showing signs of disequilibrium chemistry. So to implement disequilibrium chemistry, we now rely on self-consistent models, which provide us with the best fit abundances from the data. And we use these abundances as an input for the GCMs. In this way, we try to implement disequilibrium chemistry in our models. And when we implement this cloudless framework for WASP-ATB, we can get the emission and the transmission spectrum, which looks something like this. Now, these spectrum are the predictions made by the GCM based on the parameters which we gave. And when we compare these predicted models with the observations, we can see that the GCM is predicting these observations very accurately. This is remarkable for a complex model like GCMs. It not only validates the GCM against the observations, but also validates the framework that we have used. Now, there was a 1D study for WASP-ATB done by Weiser et al. 2025. And when we compare the 1D and 3D, starting with the 3D gave us the thermal structure of the planet at different pressure levels, which is shown on the plot on the left. The plot on the right, I have compared the 3D PT profile and 1D PT profile. Now, these profiles look very similar, but there are subtle differences which we'll dive into. So starting with the deeper atmosphere, where so here I've shown the 3D PT profile in red and the 1D PT profile in blue. So in the deeper pressure levels, the 3D profile is cooler, and this is mainly because the heat is effectively redistributed in those regions by the GCM. Whereas in the photospheric region, the temperature is almost similar between 1D and 3D. And finally, in the upper atmosphere where it is radiatively dominated, the GCMs are a bit warmer. because of the radiative balance it has to keep with the deeper atmospheres. Now, when we compare the spectrum which was obtained from 1D and 3D, we can see that both the spectrums are fairly matching to the observations, but the 1D study required gray opacity to fit the observations better in these wavelength regimes. Now, this gray opacity can be because of clouds. The plot on the right shows different condensation curves which are passing through the PT profile of this planet, which indicates that clouds should be present in the atmosphere. So, to answer these questions about clouds, we need to study these clouds in detail and to see what type of clouds that are present in the atmosphere, and if they are present, then how would it affect the transmission and the emission spectrum simultaneously. And to implement clouds in the GCM, we use tracers. So tracers are cloud-like particles which can form the clouds or evaporate the clouds according to the local pressure, temperature, and the condensation curve of the cloud species. These tracers are free to move in the atmosphere according to the dynamics of the planet or the winds of the planet. And finally, these tracers also provide a radiative feedback back to the GCM, which can alter the thermal structure of the planet. Now, when we implement this cloudy framework for WASP-ATB, we can get a cloud distribution which looks something like this. Here, the yellow color shows the presence of the clouds, and these are different cloud maps at different pressure levels. Now, instead of having these cloud distribution in terms of cloud maps, we plot the clouds in terms of cloud averages. So here in this plot, I've shown the distribution of clouds over the pressure level as a function of its latitude. And again, the yellow color shows the presence of the clouds. And here we can easily see that the equatorial region is depleted of clouds, which is because of the superrotating jet, whereas the polar regions, the clouds are present. And when we do the same thing with the longitude, we can see that the clouds are present, the clouds are evaporated from the day side, but are present on the night side. Now, this plot tells us that the distribution of clouds is 3D and it is variable for different parts of the planet, which is why GCMs are an effective tool to study clouds in exoplanets. So the cloud formation is highly dependent on the temperature. The plot on the right shows the temperature map, and the plot on the left shows the cloud distribution. As you can see, there is a lot of similarity between the temperature map and the cloud map. Also, the dynamics play a major role in the cloud distribution as well. So the distribution of clouds is completely decided by the temperature as well as the dynamics of the planet. And to implement clouds in the GCM, we assume a log normal distribution of the particle size. And for this log normal distribution, we have to give the GCM a mean particle size. So we started with 0.1 micron clouds. And we increase the particle size. And we saw that when we increase the particle size, the clouds started settling down in the atmosphere. Now, this is the expected behavior when we increase the particle size. But this also tells us that when the cloud particles are large enough, or the clouds with larger particle size will settle deeper in the atmosphere and will not affect the spectrum, which can be one of the possible cases for WASP-ATB. Now, with varying particle size, we also vary the different cloud species. So as you can see here in this plot, there are three condensation curves which are passing through the PT profile of the planet. And hence we model these three species, which are chloride, sulfides, and silicate clouds on WASP-ATB. Now, with varying particle size and varying species, we have a grid of models, out of which I'll be going through a couple of interesting cases from this grid, starting with 0.1 micron Na2S clouds. Now, these clouds are present in the atmosphere, uh, but these clouds are optically thick, which is why they have a strong radiative feedback. And due to the strong radiative feedback, they cause a thermal inversion in the PT profile or the thermal structure of the planet. Now, when we see a inversion in the TP profile, we start observing emission features instead of absorption features on the dayside spectrum. Now, this case is clearly rejected by the data. But when we look at the transmission spectrum of the same model, it is fitting the data really well, and we cannot reject this case over the cloudless case. So this is an interesting case because this shows us that there can be cloud which can fit one part of the data really well, but it completely rejected by other part of the data. So we need to be very careful when we have data for one part of the model when we are studying clouds on exoplanets. Next, I would like to show 1 micron KCl clouds. Now, these clouds are also present in the atmosphere, but they are optically thin, which is why they do not have a strong radiative feedback, and hence they cause minor changes in the TP profile, and hence minor changes in the dayside spectrum, and minor changes in the transmission spectrum. Now, this is a case which shows us that even if clouds are present, might be present in the atmosphere, uh, they might not show any signs of clouds in the spectrum, which might be another possible case for WASP-ATB. And finally, one of the interesting cases I'd like to show is 1 micron silicate clouds. Now, silicate clouds are very optically thick, and here in the TP profile, uh, we can see that the TP profile is following the condensation curve in this region. Now, this is interesting because if uh, uh, if the TP profile is hotter than the condensation curve, if the TP profile is cooler than the condensation curve, then the clouds would start forming. If clouds are formed, then the temperature would increase, and then we would cross the condensation curve, and the clouds would evaporate. So there is a continuous cycle of formation and evaporation of clouds, uh, making this case numerically unstable for GCMs. Now, these clouds also cause an inversion in the upper region of the atmosphere. And since there is an inversion, again, the data rejects this model of the dayside spectrum. And for the transmission spectrum, we almost get a flat line the for this cloudy case. So again, it is rejected by the model, by the observations. And finally, to summarize all the grid of models, I'd like to say that the cloudless spectrum fits the data really well, but some of the possible scenarios for WAS-ATB can be that Na2S or silicate clouds with larger particle size may be present as they are settled deeper in the atmosphere and would not affect the spectrum, or KCl clouds with any particle size can be also present in the atmosphere. And the gray opacity, which the 1D study used, can also be filled by PhD. So that is also a possible case for this planet. And finally, I'd like to say that we cannot say with certainty which cloud species are present on the planet, but we can say with certainty which cloud species are not present on the planet. And to do this, we would require both transmission and emission spectrum. Now, if we start looking at the bigger picture of to solve the cloudy mystery on these planets, we started with the cloudless framework of for the GCMs, and we applied it to WASP-ATB, where we were able to fit the data really well. Next, we tried the same cloudless framework for WAS-69b. But in this case, the model is not fitting the observation well. Now, maybe there are clouds in the atmosphere for this planet. Then we again tried the cloudless framework for WAS-107b. Here, we can clearly see that the data that clouds are needed to fit the observations for this planet. Now, this tells us that WASP-ATB, which was the model was able to reproduce the observations of WASP-ATB in the cloudless scenario. But for WAS-69 and WAS-107b, we needed clouds to reproduce the observation. This tells us that these 3 planets, even though having similar host stars, similar temperatures, and similar radius, they have different atmospheres, which is why there is a need to study these three planets in detail with GCMs and cloud to understand these types of planets properly, and which is the project which I'm currently working on. And finally, to conclude, I would like to say that WASP-69b and WASP-107b may have clouds in the atmosphere, but WASP-80b does not show any signs of clouds in the spectrum. So some of the possible reasons for this could be that the clouds are depleted, cloud forming elements are depleted in the atmosphere, or the clouds are forming with larger particle size, so there are no signs in the spectrum, or there might be something different with the formation of this planet, or it might be just gravity, or completely, or something else. So we can obviously get better assumptions of cloud types and cloud sizes from microphysical models. And the cloudless and the cloudy framework allows us to study these atmospheres on warm Jupiters and sub-Neptunes in much more detail, and much more information can be extracted from the 1D spectrum from the GCMs. And finally, I would like to say that both transmission and emission spectrum are important for the cloud characterization. And the paper for this study is currently on arXiv. The initial version is on arXiv, which was posted before the applications. And speaking of applications, I'm currently looking for a postdoc, so I'd be happy to talk about research and any opportunities which are available. And here are the QR code for the paper and my personal website. I would like to thank the organizers for allowing me this chance to speak, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you so much.
So thanks, Nishal. Again, if anyone has any questions, please raise your hand and then unmute first. Okay, I will go first. When you're looking at WASP 107b, will you be assessing how the clouds might be impacting limb asymmetries? So given the observational papers that show limb asymmetries, will you be exploring that within your modeling?
Yes, so the initial GCM modeling was already done for WASP 107b in Murphy et al. 2025. And we added clouds in the atmospheres to check how it would affect the limb asymmetry. And the results showed that uh, initially with cloudless GCMs, we got limb asymmetries, so the temperature difference between the two limbs. But with when the clouds were added to the GCM, the limb asymmetry increased, which clearly showed that to study these limb asymmetries, we need clouds as well as GCMs to properly model these observations with the latest JWST data. And yes, that will be one of the parts of the next project. Yes.
So thank you, Duncan.
A great talk, Nishal. I was wondering, did you consider trying including multiple cloud species in the same simulation?
I haven't done that for this paper, but that was done in the again Murphy et al. 2025, where we added multiple species of clouds. But that basically we are just complicating the scenario, and we would not be able to understand the effect of each and every cloud species individually. So this paper was focused on individual cloud species. But if at some point we are not able to get uh, reproduce the observations, then that is something we might explore with different types of cloud species included in the same species. so that we can have multiple effects of these species. But again, these effects would be completely non-linear, so we would not be able to predict which cloud species together would make the would reproduce the perfect observations. But yes, that would be something we are planning to do.
Well, thanks.
Any further questions? If not, then can we please thank Nishil again?